Right, so let's return to one of our top stories. We're obviously looking at the debate that was happening in the National Assembly, a motion put forward by Julius Malema from the EFF, obviously calling for, amongst other things, the Embassy of Israel to be shut down in South Africa and for South Africa to suspend its diplomatic relations. Let's continue that conversation by analysing it further. Professor Christopher Isike, Professor of African Politics and International Relations at the University of Pretoria, joins us for more. Prof. Chris, good afternoon, and thank you for your time with us here on the SABC.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
Prof, let's look at what transpired in Parliament today and some of the sentiments that emerged. What's your observation in terms of South Africa's stance at large?
Well, clearly, there is some division, but I think that overall, South Africa seems to be taking leadership on this particular crisis that needs to be commended. Of course, we know that other countries such as the UK have debated this in their parliaments, but I did not get to see all of the debate, and I think it's still ongoing. However, it is clear that there's a strong voice for South Africa to cut ties with Israel, especially as the South African government has joined other countries of the world to refer, the Israel to the International Criminal Court, for crimes against humanity that they believe Israel is committing in against the Palestinian people.
Prof, thank you for those opening remarks. Let's also look at the resolution that had been adopted by the UN Security Council as well for humanitarian pauses in Gaza. It was after that Malta-sponsored draft came after 4 failed attempts. What is the impact of this in relation to what's transpiring in the Middle East as we speak?
Well, the thing is that those votes do not have a power of policy per se, and Israel has ignored the previous one and will likely continue to do so. However, they speak to where the world is right now in terms of lack of support for what Israel is doing, and it also represents a shift in how the Middle East has been viewed previously and how things may shape out, going forward in the future. More countries are beginning to show interest, take a stance, and much more stronger stance than they've been. And there's been a break even in the ranks of certain countries in the West. If you look at the British vote, on the immediate ceasefire, which didn't pass, but you saw more than a third of the opposition party, the Labour Party, break ranks with the official party position against this, and we're going to see more of these as more people get in the streets. The power of public diplomacy on the part of people, rather citizenship diplomacy, is beginning to draw strength across the entire world.
Prof, thank you for that. I actually wanted to look at that shift that has occurring because the resolution is binding by international law. As you alluded to, there are other Security Council resolutions that are binding by international law that Israel doesn't comply with. Some are questioning the efficacy and whether it will add enough pressure on Israel. Also, given the fact that the US allowed the resolution to be passed and didn't veto.
Yes, it's interesting. All of this is as a result of the power of ordinary people, the citizens of the world, coming together and of all hues and colors across the world, sometimes within the same country, agreeing that, there was something wrong about this. Of course, the role of the US, we've seen that the US is now beginning to take its backstage and changing its rhetoric around what Israel is doing, roundly condemning the fact that they did not authorize the bombing or the siege of the hospital in Gaza yesterday. So it signifies a shift, and all of this also have something to do with the internal politics of countries like the US that are going into elections next year, and the President Joe Biden is beginning to get signals that even his own base within the Democratic Party are not very pleased with the way that the US has positioned itself, in this. So, as a world leader, what South Africa is doing right now is what a world leader like the US is supposed to have been doing right from the get-go. However, we see that shift that you talk about on the part of countries like the US. We see it in countries like Belgium. in the West, and even France, strongly opposing and calling for a ceasefire. So these are important shifts, and hopefully they would eventually bring pressure to bear on the Israeli government to do a volte-face.
Prof, speaking about South Africa taking the lead, we saw, South Africa, of course, taking the lead and referring Israeli Prime Minister to the ICC for war crimes and crimes against humanity. But in the same breath, I also want to look at some of the targeted attacks that have been occurring, within the region. Even on those providing aid, we saw an incident with the head of office in Gaza for Gift of the Givers as an example. How do you think these steps are further adding pressure, but time is also running out, given that such incidences are becoming more frequent as we speak?
Yes, they all help to ramp up the pressure against the Israeli government. People of goodwill, people of good nature are speaking and trying to take a stance. I think apart from this, is no longer just an ideological issue. It's actually now a moral issue that is gaining traction across the entire world. So there will be a limit to how much anyone can continue to make it a one-sided issue of survival for the state of Israel, because we will have to ask the question, and this was actually asked even in the US, how many children have to die before everyone in the world would recognize that those children that are dying in Gaza are also children like the ones who died in Israel. How many more lives do we need to lose before we can disagree that there is need for the killings to stop, and that these killings in any way are not going to actually stop the cycle of violence and hate and more violence that has been the history of this particular conflict in the last 50 years.
Prof, well, there obviously are more questions than answers at this point, but we're obviously monitoring developments as it unfolds. Thank you for your time and for weighing in on that matter. Prof. Chris Isike from the African Politics and International Relations Desk at the University of Pretoria, weighing in on the Middle East conflict, particularly the debate that happened in National Assembly today in South Africa, the Israel-Hamas war debate. We're also looking at South Africa taking the lead, referring Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for war crimes and crimes against humanity to the International Criminal Court, and really just the UN Security Council having adopted a resolution for humanitarian pauses in Gaza. So there's lots unfolding, lots of pressure being added, and we're obviously going to bring you the latest as it unfolds.